Someone reached out to me and said that he was recently in an interview and he was asked to build a little game using React for a front-end junior React position. So this is what I'm trying to solve on my channel, but I do recommend to read through maybe what I have here in the screenshot and try to solve it yourself. He was asked to build a small little game where you had to build a component, and that component takes in some data as props. And the data, sorry, this got messed up with formatting. The data is going to take in basically a key like this. And he needs to display some buttons on the page where they can select the country and the corresponding capital of that country in the game. And if they get those correct, I think it removes the buttons. It says a button should display for each country and each capital. So for example, number 2, it says display 4 buttons. So the countries and their capitals, and they should display in random order. Clicking a button should set its background color to blue. Clicking another button should remove both buttons if correct country and capital pair has been selected. Set the background color of both buttons to red if the wrong pair has been selected. Assume the previously selected pair was wrong. Clicking another button should restore the default background color of the wrong pair and set the background color of the click button to blue. When there are no more buttons left, display a message, congratulations. Export your component as a default export. Let's just go through this one by one. I think if you just go through here and just like delete stuff as you're adding it, it'll be easier. So I have a React application already set up. I'm gonna go ahead and just make a component in here. Like you could make it in a separate file if you want to, but I'm gonna make it right here. And we're gonna call that right here, okay? Now I would say if they give you an example like piece of data, let's just start with that. Let's just make sure that we can do the example that they gave and then test later on with more data. So if this thing is taking in data as props, that means we need to go up here and we need to define data like this. And I'm going to go ahead and just type this because we are using TypeScript. So I'll say record and I'll say string, and then that'll be string. Okay, so it's just a record of countries followed by their capitals. And we're going to go ahead and just return a fragment here. I'll say like hello. So first of all, I want to make sure this works. So let's go and make sure it's that hello prints out. It does. So we're good. We have the component being rendered out correctly. Now, what are we trying to do again? We need to display buttons for every country and capital. So let's focus on that. How do I get all the countries from a record, right? The countries are the key of this object. So I can say const countries is equal to object.keys, and then I'll say data. That'll give us back all of the countries. How do we get back the capitals? I can say const capitals is equal to object.values, like that. And now we have the capitals, okay? So now we want to display these things on the page, okay? Now these are going to be both arrays. If you hover over this, it says this is a string array. This is also a string array. So let's combine them together. So I'm going to say const options is equal to ... countries and ... capitals. Okay, so that just combines them into one array. So again, what are we trying to do? We want to display a button for each country and each capital. So now we have the countries and capitals all combined to a single array. We should be good to just do a map over this. And I'll just say options, I guess. And we're going to go ahead and render out a button here like this. And then I'm going to go ahead and do that and close that off. Make sure that saves, auto formatting is working. Now option is going to have the string value. So let's just go ahead and put option here. And let's make sure this shows up on the page. Now we have 4 buttons. Okay, so we've basically solved number 2. Okay, we have the buttons displayed for the countries and the capitals. So let's just delete it and move on. Go ahead and delete this one as well. Now, number 3 says the button should be displayed in random order. How do you randomize this array? Now, if the person allows you to do an npm install and you can bring in Lodash, there's a shuffle method on Lodash that you can use to just shuffle this array and make it randomized. If they actually want you to sort it, you could also do options.sort. And honestly, I think you could just return math.random here. But you need to make sure that some of them are negative, some of them are positive, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just subtract like 0.5. That should randomize it, I think. Technically, you don't have to bring those in. I think that'll randomize this. Let's just verify every time I do this. Is this random? I mean, it seems pretty random. I don't know if that's the proper way to do it, but basically what I'm saying is give me a number between 0 and 1, subtract 0.5 from it, so that the range is going to be negative 0.1 through 0.5. And I believe how sorting works, if it's positive, it'll like move the record higher in the sorting algorithm. If it's negative, it'll move it like below the other one in the sorting algorithm. Basically, we're just saying just randomly change stuff, okay? So now that we have them all sorted, let's move on to the next step. Clicking the button should set its background color to blue. That should be pretty easy to do, right? Let's just go ahead and add an on-click listener to the button. And that's going to call a function. And inside this function, we need to set BG to blue. How do I set the BG of a button to blue? Especially since we have to track it, right? So we're going to need state somehow. So basically, every time you click on this button, I need to keep track of what they clicked so I know what color that button needs to be. So I'm going to go ahead and say const, and then I will just say color map and set color map. And we will just default this to an empty object right now, but it's going to be a record of string. And yeah, we could do string as well, just to keep track of the colors. We can refactor this later on if we find a better approach. But the idea is every time you click on one of these buttons, we're going to call this. And we're going to go ahead and just take the current color map like this. But then we want to update the current option that we have, and we want to make it be a background of blue. So instead of, we could potentially hard code the color in here. Is this hex? Let's see how many digits we have. We have 1, 2, I think the 4 needs to go away to make that proper hex. Yeah. So the approach I'm going down right now is like hard coding colors into the data structure. That seems kind of strange. I would rather hard code state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here. I'm going to say type of button state. And that's going to be either default, or it's going to be selected, or it's going to be wrong. Because I do believe they talk about like a red. So instead of storing a record string of string, I'm going to do string of button state. Okay, so down here, instead of storing blue, which I'm actually going to pull up here and say like blue color is equal to this for right now. Okay, we're going to go ahead and change this to selected. That makes sense. So when you click on the button, we are changing some type of state to keep track of what button has been selected inside this color map. And now what we need to do is we can dynamically add a class here to give it a selected. Now, personally, I would bring in the class names library, but to keep this as simple as possible, let's just go ahead and do some string interpolation here. And I'm going to say if color map of option is equal to selected, then we're going to go ahead and just give it a class of selected. Otherwise, we'll give it nothing. Okay, so now the last step is let's load up our index file. Go to the bottom here, and we want to make a class called selected, and we're going to say background is that hexadecimal color that we had up here. Okay, let's just go ahead and put that in. And hopefully this works. Let's test this out. Probably don't even need that blue color in this file anymore. Let's click on this and notice that the colors do change to blue, but we have an issue. Now that we are changing the state, it randomizes it every time. Okay, so we have to go back and fix that because you don't always code the correct thing the first time, right? You have to go back and refix maybe bad solutions that you didn't think thoroughly. So now that we have this bug, it's actually making me rethink my design a little bit. And that's something that you can actually show during an interview is like, can you refactor an approach that you had? Maybe you went down the wrong path. Maybe you didn't spend enough time actually thinking about a solution before you just started coding, which is kind of what I did in my case. I just started coding. I probably should have thought a little bit harder about what the heck I was actually doing. Okay, so let's go ahead and just make a new state here. I'm going to say options and set options. Let's just use some state. And what we're going to type this is it's going to be an array of options. I'll just say option, and it'll be array of option. Okay, we don't have option declared, so I'm going to say type option is going to be equal to the value, which will be a string. And that's going to be like either the country or the capital, and then maybe also a state. Okay, we can change this up a little bit if you want to make this a little easier. So I'll just go ahead and say button state. Okay, and then we are going to basically take those countries and capitals. I'm going to go ahead and take this, and we're going to pass that to initial state. And then we're going to map over it, and I'll say value. And then we're going to return an array that has value and then also has state of default. Okay, have I confused you yet? So what I basically did is when this component first mounts, we're going to set up some initial state of all those countries and capitals. And I actually want to start encoding the state of if the button has been selected or if it's wrong directly inside of an object itself. So instead of having this external color map here, what we can do is we can actually delete that. Okay, and so then whenever you click on a button, instead of saying set color map, we're going to go ahead and just use the selected option that you have. I'll say like dot option. And then we're going to say state is going to be equal to selected. And then same thing here. Now option is no longer a map, it's just a thing. So we can just check if it's selected or not. So the issue that I'm getting in TypeScript right now is that this is an array of things. So we actually need to say like, this is going to be a, so I actually want to say options dot map here. I'll say opt. So we basically want to loop through the array and update the thing in place. So I'll say if the current one we're looking at is equal to, by reference, the one that we're mapping over right here, then we're going to go ahead and just return kind of a new version of that. Okay, I'll just do this. Otherwise, we're just going to return the actual thing. And this one probably needs to be a return statement. And I think I need to put a return statement here. That's why it's complaining. So hopefully, if I haven't super confused everyone yet, let's just take a recap. We did some major refactoring here where I'm going to store the state of if the button is selected or wrong on an actual array of these option types. Okay, and as you click on the options, we loop over the array, we find the one that we clicked on, and we just change the state to selected. Otherwise, we just leave it alone. That's how the ternary is working here. And then over here, we're going to go ahead and just display the value. So let's go back. This is all to fix that random sorting issue. So let's see, did we fix it? It looks... Then the last thing is I forgot to fix the sorting issue. So let's actually add the sorting directly to this array that we're kind of setting up here. I'll just sort it when we're setting it up in the state. And I added it to the wrong thing here. Like that. You could also do this in effect if you want to. And I think this is complaining because the sort method doesn't know like what we're returning here. So I got to just go ahead and like force it to be that. Or if you wanted to, you could actually sort prior. So I could actually just sort up here and that would allow it to work better. Okay. All right, let's make sure this works. I'm going to do a hard refresh and click some buttons. Make sure it's not like sorting. Okay. So again, if you click on the wrong combo, okay, I think that's working good. Let's just go back to this. Clicking a button should set as background to blue. So again, I went down a path. I realized that was probably a bad solution. I'm going to go ahead and refactor some code. We also had a problem with sorting, and I wanted to refactor that as well. So I think this code's a little bit better, but you can be the judge of that. So now what we want to do is if you click on the wrong combos, let's look at this this task 4, clicking on the button, we did this one. Clicking on another button should remove both buttons if a correct country in capital pair has been selected. Let's focus on that. How do we do that? So I'm just going to go ahead and inline this. You could potentially pull this out to a function over here if you want. I like just making it inline for the most part, unless it gets too complicated, and then I'll pull it out. But how do we know if we selected the correct pairs? And also, how do we know what was the previous one that we selected? Okay, so what we should probably do is keep track of the previous one that we selected. So I'll say like selected and set selected equals use state, and we will just keep track of an option here, and we will just say it's undefined. So now when you click on the button, if we haven't already selected something, then we're going to go ahead and say set selected is equal to selected. Okay. Otherwise, we know that we have two things selected already. Okay. Let's go ahead and change it. If we haven't already selected one, then we want to select the one that we just clicked, and then we're going to change the state of that button to selected. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to figure out if the one that we have selected is either the country or the capital of the one that we just clicked. So again, up here we have data, and data is like this object that looks like this. Okay, let's grab this over here and let's just use that as a reference. So basically, if option is equal to Berlin, or if option is equal to Germany, we need to check if selected is equal to Berlin, then we need to go ahead and like look up the country, but selected could also be the country itself, right? So like I said, like Germany. So it gets a little bit confusing, but what we want to do is if the thing that we selected, so like if we have selected dot value, if it's equal to Berlin, for example, then we need to go and look up the one that we just clicked and check if the data of the one that we just clicked is equal to the one that we have selected. Because remember, we just selected Berlin and now we selected Germany, or vice versa. We've selected Berlin over here, but now we're selecting Germany. So we want to take the one that we're clicking, look it up, and figure out what the value is. So that, or we kind of do it the other way. So I'll say data selected dot value is equal to option dot value. I think this will work. We will find out. But if you selected the right one, we're going to go ahead and set the state of both of the buttons that you have selected. They need to be set to, they need to be removed. Okay, so let's just go ahead and say set options. And we will say options.filter. And we want to go ahead and just return if the option.value is equal to selected.value. Or if op.value is equal to option.value. Now I'm going to negate this whole thing. So let's make sure this works. If you select the two correct things, it should just remove those buttons from our options map. Let's go here. I'm going to click Berlin and Germany, and it did not work. Let's try Germany and Berlin, and that did not work. So at this point, I would probably add a debugger to try to figure out what the algorithm you're doing is and make sure this is correct. You are getting a warning here about keys, so I should probably go and add a key to this. I'll say key is equal to option.value. So I'll click Berlin and I'll click Germany, and it's not firing off our debugger. So we're not getting the here, and the reason we're not getting here is because we aren't clearing out I think we're setting the wrong selected. So I'm going to go ahead and say option there instead. And over here, I'm just going to go ahead and set it back to undefined. And I think that should hopefully fix it. I'm going to get rid of this else for right now. Let's try it again. Let's click Germany and Berlin, and it's gone. Let's do Berlin and Germany. It's good to show both test cases because you can select the country first and then the capital, or you can do the capital first and then the country. So let's also select two wrong ones. So I'll do Berlin and Baku. And notice that it doesn't work. So let's implement the next part, which is setting the background colors to red. So we're going to go over here and we're going to say an else. So this is the one that you selected the wrong combo. I guess I can say wrong pair. And what we want to do is we want to map over all of the options and just set them to the error state if they match any of this criteria. Okay, so I'll do a map here. I'm going to go ahead and just return this exact same thing that we're trying to check. Actually, I'm going to negate this. I'm going to say if it's equal to that, or if it's equal to this, then we're going to do ternary, and we will say return ... opt. We'll say state is equal to, I think we called it wrong. Okay. Otherwise, we're going to return opt here. And I think what we can do is we go here, we can say wrong, we'll say background is whatever red this is. I don't know why that color is all messed up. I'm just going to do red. Like that. And then we're going to go up here. I'm just going to do another ternary. Honestly, I would pull in the class names library, but I don't know if the tester would want that. So if it's wrong, then I'm going to go ahead and say wrong Otherwise, we'll just do that. Okay, so let's try seeing if this works. Okay, there you go. I think that's working. Berlin, Baku, it works good. Now the next step is if you have the wrong pair showing, when you click on the next one, you need to kind of reset them all to default state. So I think what we need to do is here is like we just need to go ahead and clear out all of these and set them all to default state. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this here. And we're just going to go ahead and return opt, and we'll say state of default. But since we're already doing a map down here, what we could actually do is I think we could probably just change this to state.default to reset them all back. So like, otherwise I'd have to do like a callback for the state setters. Let's try it again. Let's do Berlin, Baku, and then we'll do Germany, Baku. Okay. All right. I think that's actually basically it, right? When there are no buttons left, display a congratulations. There's no button left. Okay. So basically we could do a computed over here. And we could say const is game over equals to options.length is equal to 0. So if there's no more things left because we're like filtering them down, the game would be over. And we could just go ahead and show, we'll say if is game over, then we're going to return just a div that says like, what is it supposed to say? Congratulations. There. Simple enough, right? So if I do Germany and Berlin and these two, it says congratulations. Export your component as the default export. So I mean, in this case, they want you to actually make a separate file. So like we should probably just make like a components directory like this. And I will say country capital game.tsx. Go ahead and paste all that in. Say export default function. Go down to where I have a duplicate, delete those, and that should be good. So now what we could do is delete this whole function and all those states, and we're going to import it from that file we just made. And that's kind of what they want in this game. Now they also said they expect React 17. Honestly, I use 18. I don't know if that's going to make me fail. But I think 17 still has hooks and everything like that, right? All right, so before you just like stop, always go back to your code and try to find is there areas that you can improve? Are there things that maybe you could clean up a little bit? So for example, this right here, this is kind of esoteric. You can't understand like what this is doing. So I'm going to actually make a function called randomize, which is going to return that. Okay, and that allows you to basically, instead of saying sort with this random thing, I'm going to say sort randomize. So now as you're reading through this, it's very obvious what this is doing. Assuming that I didn't have a bug here, let's just go up a level. Okay, so now that's still working. Cool. Are there more places that we could potentially clean code up? So right here, I don't like how we're like pulling out some constants here just to use them in one place. So I might actually do this and pull that out to there. Okay, so now there's not just like variables sitting around that we're not using anywhere else in the code. They are just going to be inlined right here. You might say this is not as clean. You could probably make a function over here that says function get countries if you wanted to. I could say object.keys, and then I could just go ahead and pass in like data here. Again, you're trying to impress the person who's like doing the interview. So is doing this cleaner than what it was before? I would say yes. So get countries, get capitals. I'll say values here, and instead of doing that, I will say that. Okay, so this makes sense. We pass in some data. We say get countries, get the capitals, we randomize them, and then we are just setting a default state to all of them. This is much cleaner in my opinion. Make sure you do values correctly. Okay, let's keep scrolling through, see if there's anywhere else that we could potentially clean up some code. Now, some people might look at this and be like, why would you inline this whole function? I personally, I'm a fan of inlining because you can just do this and collapse it if you don't want to see it. Some people would probably question why you put this all inline. I wouldn't, but if you want to, I mean, you could bring this up here. I could say function on button click, and that'll make your interviewer happier. And you can just go ahead and make sure that you call the code all up there. Okay, but then you're gonna have to pass in the option like this. And then down here, if you want to make this JSX a little bit cleaner, you could just call that function directly if you want to. Let's just go ahead and do this. And we'll call it option. Okay. Same thing with this. If you wanted to pull this out to a function to make this JSX a little cleaner to read, you could potentially say function get button class. And we're going to go ahead and just return that ternary. We'll say option, and that's going to be an option. And this also, the ternary, probably not the cleanest. So what you could potentially do is say if option.state is equal to selected, then we're going to return selected. And then we'll say else if option.state is equal to wrong, then we will return wrong, else return nothing. Some people don't like ternaries. Sometimes I like using them, sometimes I don't. So you could potentially pass that in like this, and that'll make the code a little bit cleaner if that's what your interviewer might be looking for. And then you could say this is a more testable function, potentially. You could actually pull this out above your component, and then you could export it. And if you're using unit tests, you could just go ahead and test that via unit test if you wanted to. So that's kind of a good thing you want to talk about during the interview. Same thing with this whole function here. Now this function you can't really pull out to the top unless you also, I guess you'd have to pass in the options here. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna keep this inline. It'd be easier. So something you could do is you could potentially pull this out to a function above. Sometimes it's okay. If it doesn't seem like it's too confusing, I mean, you could, at the very least, you could return this to an implicit return. Like that. Looks a little bit cleaner in my opinion if you guys do a simple ternary like this. Now what you could also do is there is some overlap between these things, right? Now what we could do is we can actually do the ternary right here instead. So if they're the same, we do selected, otherwise we do default. And now we've actually cleaned up quite a lot of code here, which makes this easier to understand. Okay, clean that up. And this looks perfect. I would just leave this as is. Let's keep scrolling down. Let's go ahead and see, is there any way we can clean this stuff up? So looking at here, there is some overlap between these two things. Like if you notice, this is exactly duplicated. We could try to dry this up a little bit, potentially. So like we can go up to the top and I can say function is part of pair. And then we're going to go ahead and return that thing. I'll say opt. I'll say option, and I'll say selected option. Looks like we also need an option here. So this is kind of confusing to be honest, but we basically have to pass in all three of these things so that it can figure out if the thing that you clicked was part of the selected pair. Okay, so we'll do opt, we'll do option, we'll do selected. Okay, let's see if this actually works. Make sure this still works. Okay, looks good. I would probably think a little bit harder about this interface. Maybe the naming of this, not the best. But again, can we clean this up more? I would probably go ahead and just do this. And just see if this makes sense. So if you read through this, we want to make sure that the thing that we're filtering is part of the pair. And if it's not part of the pair, we'll keep it. Okay, so that makes sense. I think the naming is good. Down here, again, we can clean this up to make this implicit return. All right, looks good. And then if it's part of the pair, we're basically setting the state to wrong. Otherwise, just return the normal thing. And then again, you could do the ternary if you wanted to do directly here and say if it's part of the pair, we'll do wrong. Otherwise, we'll just say opt.state. Okay, is this cleaner? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I think it kind of is cleaner. Instead of having the turning on the outside, you just have it nested inside of the thing that's actually changing. So I think this is pretty good. Now, the last part that I think is kind of confusing is this. Like, what is this doing? Like, this makes me want to add a comment because I have no idea what this is doing. If the selected value is the capital, so I'm actually going to say const capital is equal to that, so that we can actually understand what's going on. If the selected value is the capital, or the capital, I'm going to say selected capital is equal to this. If the selected value is equal to capital, or if the selected capital is equal to the current value. Does that read a little bit better? I don't know. Maybe. You get to play around with the naming of stuff. But the point I'm trying to make is when you get it working, don't just stop. Go back and say, is there a better way I can write this code? Can I refactor this code to make it cleaner? Can I extract functions to the top so that they're more testable? Can I rename things so it's easier and cleaner to understand from someone from the outside? I'm not truly happy with this naming, but I think it works. So if you guys try this for yourself, be sure to leave a comment and just call me out if there's anything that I did that was kind of sloppy. This took me about 40 minutes to do this video. So I think the person who said that they also tried to solve it themselves, they said it took them 45 minutes. So I think this is actually a pretty interesting problem to try to solve. So definitely try it out for yourself. Other than that, I have a Discord channel. You guys are welcome to join if you want to find a place to kind of hang out and talk to other developers. Like always, have a good day, happy coding, and good luck in any interviews if you have any coming up. Later.